قد أفلح المؤمنون.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. Respected Muslim brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, we are going to be discussing a historical analysis of a very, very important event from the life of a Syeda Fatimah al-Zahra, salamullahi alayha, and that is mainly the Khutbah Fadakiyyah. The Khutbah Fadakiyyah is very, very important. It is very famous. It is oft recited. It is oft spoken about, especially during the Layali Fatimiyah throughout the year. So a lot of people grow up listening to it. A lot of khutabat try to memorize it, and there's a bit of controversy surrounding it. Here in al-Muminoon, we try to do our best to do a fair, unbiased, historical analysis, and to provide our viewers, to provide our listeners with information regarding these events, and to explain whether or not they actually happened and what is their relevance if they actually did. When it comes to the Khutbah Fadakiyyah, as usual, just a short introduction is necessary. In order to understand this khutbah, we have to understand the context of it. Then we're going to go over some of the sources to verify whether or not this is real. So the context of the Khutbah Fadakiyyah is that most scholars believe that it happened after the attack on Syeda Zahra, salamullahi alayha, after her home was attacked, and then she began to dispute with Abu Bakr over the issue of the land of Fadak. The attack on the house, we don't know exactly when it happened, but we do know that it happened very soon after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we will cover that inshallah in another one of our videos. When it comes to the dispute between Fatimah and Abu Bakr, this is a very, very long, very complex topic. And if we were to try to cover it, it would have to be its own video. And we will get to that inshallah. When we're discussing the martyrdom of Syeda Zahra, we will go over the argument between her and Abu Bakr regarding Fadak. And we'll go over the arguments that she put forward, and we will go over the responses of Abu Bakr. The Khutbah Fadakiyyah, the context for it is that after Abu Bakr denied Fatimah al-Zahra Fadak, she is said to have gone into the mosque of Medina, and she is said to have delivered a very, very powerful, very passionate sermon where she basically attacks the establishment, she attacks the Sahaba for failing to come to her aid, and she strongly attacks Abu Bakr for the way he has oppressed her and her family. So that being said, we are going to be going over the sources of the khutbah. We're not going to go over the khutbah itself, and that's mainly for two reasons. One of them is that it is very, very long. When it comes to the sources that we're going to be providing for you, it's not going to be a full scan. Because if it was a full scan, some of them are 9 pages long, 9 pages of just the khutbah. But with that being said, let us go ahead and get started. When it comes to the sources of the Khutbah Fadakiyyah, the first question we have to ask when it comes to an event like this, when it comes to a sermon, is did it actually happen? Do we have enough sources to make the claim that Syeda Zahra actually did this, that she actually said these things? And so the answer is yes. And this is very, very clear when you look at the evidence for the primary sources, some of which are sadly no longer with us. So, for example, this is Kitab al-Fihrist. Kitab al-Fihrist by Shaykhuna, Shaykh al-Ta'ifa, al-Imam Abi Ja'far al-Tusi, rahmatullahi alayh. So Shaykh al-Tusi has a biography for Lut ibn Yahya, who is also known as Abu Mikhnaf. I want to point out, here in the bio, he makes a mistake. He says that he is min ashabi Amir al-Mu'mineen, ومن أصحاب الحسن والحسين. This is not true. What is true, he's actually quoting al-Kishi here, and then he corrects him. He says that Abu Mikhnaf's ancestor, his father, his grandfather, was a companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen, but he himself never met Imam Ali. And he was a famous historian. He compiled many books of history, the most famous of which is his Maqtal of Imam al-Hussein, which the likes of al-Tabari and al-Baladhuri transmitted in their books of history. Unfortunately, the original book is lost. And he had many other books of history dealing with topics such as battles and important events in Iraq. And so, Shaykh al-Tusi in al-Fihrist in page 204 to 205 says the following: وله كتاب خطبة الزهراء عليه السلام أخبرنا بها أحمد بن محمد بن موسى عن ابن عقدة عن يحيى بن زكريا بن شيبان عن نصر بن مزاحم. Nasr ibn Muzahim is the other famous Shia historian who wrote Kitab وقعة صفين. عن أبي مخنف عن عبد الرحمن بن جندب عن أبيه قال خطب أمير المؤمنين وذكر الخطبة بطولها. So according to a Shaykh al-Tusi, Abu Mikhnaf had a book which he transmits on the authority of Abd al-Rahman ibn Jundub, who is the son of one of Imam Ali's companions. He transmits that Imam Ali gave a khutbah where he mentioned this khutbah, the khutbah of Fatimah al-Zahra, salamullahi alayha. The fact that Abu Mikhnaf, who is a very, very early historian, he's one of the old classical historians of Islamic history, the fact that he had a book on this topic shows you that this is something that is firmly established, correct? That this indeed happened. And there are other sources as well. For example, Abu al-Faraj al-Isfahani, ghafarallahu lahu wa rahmatullahi alayh, he also mentions the Khutbah Fadakiyyah in his book Maqatil al-Talibiyin. He mentions it, but he does not go over it, which is something that Abu al-Faraj does a lot in Maqatil al-Talibiyin, is he will mention something like, oh, by the way, we have, there's this khutbah that happened, right? By the way, Imam Zayn al-Abidin salamullah alayh gave a khutbah in the court of Yazid, but then he doesn't quote the khutbah. He says like, the point of this book is to go over the martyrdom and the deaths of the Talibiyin. It is not to, so I want to remain on task. And this is sometimes very frustrating because he quotes something and we're like, we really wish you would have quoted the full thing. We would have really benefited had you quoted the full thing. So in Maqatil al-Talibiyin, Abu al-Faraj al-Isfahani narrates that Ibn Abbas narrated a khutbah, the Khutbah Fadakiyyah, from Syeda Zainab, salamullah alayha, Syeda Zainab bint Ali ibn Abi Talib. This is one of the rare ahadith of Syeda Zainab. Syeda Zainab, salamullah alayha, does not have many ahadith. There are not many ahadith transmitted on her authority. However, this is one of them. One of them is the fact that Ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Abbas, the famous Sahabi, narrated the Khutbah Fadakiyyah from Syeda Zainab, who obviously is narrating it regarding her mother. In any case, this is another early source. The fact that Abu al-Faraj is confirming that Ibn Abbas also had a chain of transmission to it. However, this one is also lost. This sermon has also been narrated by Ibn Abi Tayfur al-Baghdadi. Ibn Abi Tayfur al-Baghdadi has a book, it's called Balaghat al-Nisa, or the Eloquences of the Women, which is basically a book where he compiles certain sermons and certain sayings of famous women throughout Islamic history. And so one of these is the Khutbah Fadakiyyah. And unfortunately, this book, I know many of you are seeing it on the screen now. Unfortunately, this book is in dire need of a reprint. He mentions a chain of transmission. He says, قال أبو الفضل ذكرت لأبي الحسين زيد بن علي بن الحسين بن علي بن أبي طالب صلوات الله عليه كلام فاطمة عند منع أبي بكر إياها فدك. So he's narrating from Zayd al-Shahid. So Ibn Abi Tayfur lived way after Zayd al-Shahid, salamullah alayh, the famous brother of Imam al-Bakr, the son of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. This is something that we will go over. We'll clarify this in one of the later sources. But he also narrates this, though his chain is not very good. Shaykh al-Saduq, rahmatullahi alayh, Shaykhuna al-Saduq, rahmatullahi alayh, the author of one of our 4 books, Man la yahdharuhu al-Faqih, he has this khutbah, he mentions it with 3 different chains of transmission. We read in Kitab Man la yahdharuhu al-Faqih, in volume 3, page 567 to 568, hadith 4943, he transmits part of the khutbah, not the entire thing. And he narrates it with, I believe, 1 chain here in Kitab Man la yahdharuhu al-Faqih. So as I said, he has 3 chains. The 2 others are in his book Ilal al-Shara'i. In volume 2, the print of the book that I'm using, and I think it's the best one, is volume 2, page 79 to page 82, hadith 4447 to 4449. Shaykhuna Saduq gives us 3 different chains of transmission. So we have that Abu Mikhnaf had a book, the fact that we have a report confirming that Abdullah ibn Abbas narrated it on the authority of Syeda Zainab, we have Ibn Abi Tayfur, we have Shaykh al-Saduq with 3 different chains of transmission, and there are more. Sharif Murtadha, rahmatullahi alayh, who I believe is the best source for this khutbah, he narrates in Ash-Shafi fil Imamah, which is his polemical masterpiece, which was written to refute the Mu'tazili, Qadi Abdul Jabbar, qabahahullah. He narrates in volume 4, page 69 to 73, the Khutbah Fadakiyyah. He also provides chains of transmission. And again, brothers and sisters, as I said, the reason why we're not going over it, we're not going to read it, is because as many of you can see, it's very long, and the different versions of it quote these long, lengthy parts of it. So reading the entire thing would be very difficult. And at the end of this lecture, inshallah, we'll give a summary of the khutbah. So Sharif Murtadha narrates this in a Shafi fil Imamah. He narrates it from his teacher, and he narrates it with 3 different chains of transmission back to 3 different people. Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, Ibn Aisha, who is a tabi'i, and Zayd ibn Ali al-Shahid. Moving on, there are further sources. There are even some other non-Shia sources that are quite famous or from non-Shia scholars that are quite famous that mention this khutbah. So, for example, Ali ibn al-Athir mentions this in his book. I believe it's pronounced Manal al-Talib, page 501 to 508. That is a 7-page scan for you guys. So, and this is part of the reason why we're not going to read the entire thing. So in Manal al-Talib, he mentions it as well. He narrates it on the authority of Zainab bint Ali, which reinforces what Abu al-Faraj al-Isfahani said, as we cited earlier. But he later claims it is a fabrication. And the reason why he claims it's a fabrication is very, very interesting. And we're going to have to refute him in order to make our argument. Ali ibn al-Athir, the author of Usd al-Ghaba, the author of Nihaya fi Gharib al-Hadith, very, very famous Sunni scholar, the author of Al-Kamil fi al-Tarikh. Here he claims, says, this khutbah is fabricated because it is too eloquent. Too eloquent. The words are too nice. Someone must have made this up later and attributed it to Fatimah al-Zahra. He also claims, he says, I met people who told me that they were alive when this khutbah was made up, as in this khutbah magically came into existence one day. Okay, so he is claiming that this khutbah is fabricated. The next source that we will quote that mentions this khutbah is Kitab Maqtal al-Hussein by al-Khawarizmi, which is a source that many of you know when it comes to the literature of Karbala, the literature of Imam al-Hussein. He mentions with his chain of transmission to Aisha, the daughter of Abu Bakr. So this confirms again what Sharif al-Murtadha Alam al-Huda, rahmatullahi alayh, he transmits it on the authority of Aisha as well. Lastly, we will go over one more scholar, and this is Ibn Abi al-Hadid al-Mu'tazili. Ibn Abi al-Hadid, in his Sharh Nahj al-Balagha, which is a history book, he also mentions this khutbah, and he is quoting another lost book. It is called Kitab al-Saqifa by al-Jawhari. This book was lost. However, he quotes the khutbah, and he gives another chain of transmission for it. Transmitting from Jawhari's Saqifa wa Fadak, he has 3 different chains of transmission. One to a Syeda Zainab bint Ali, salamullahi alayha, which is now, this is the 3rd time we are seeing confirmation that she narrated this khutbah of her mother, alayhi salam. One to Imam Muhammad ibn Ali al-Bakr, Imam al-Bakr, alayhi afdal salatu wassalam. Imam al-Bakr, as we've mentioned time and time again, Imam al-Bakr is the historian of al-Muhammad. You always see that when there are historical reports being narrated on the authority of the Imam, it's usually from him. And even in the Sunni books, when you read the historical reports of Imam al-Bakr, they paint a very, very good image when it comes to the seerah of the Prophet and the seerah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, salamullahi alayh, as well as the seerah of Imam al-Hasan, Imam al-Hussein. And lastly, so he said he has 3 chains of transmission, one from Zainab, one from Imam al-Bakr, one from Abdullah ibn al-Hasan al-Muthanna. And by the way, Abdullah ibn al-Hasan al-Muthanna is not a figure that we have a good view of. We have some very negative reports about him. That he's the father of an-Nafs al-Zakiyah, and he proclaimed that his son was an imam. This is obviously not something that we take lightly. However, the fact that he's not the only one transmitting it shows us that this khutbah is quite valid. If we were to combine all of these chains of transmission, if we were to make a chain map, we'd see that this khutbah has a strong level of corroboration, a strong level of tawatur. So there is very little chance that it is fabricated. There's very little chance that this khutbah is something that someone made up. The people who argue this, as we said, one of them was Ali ibn al-Athir. So there are other scholars that went more in depth. So the claim that al-Khutbah al-Fadakiyyah is fabricated, and I've seen some, unfortunately, even some Shia brothers have put forth this view. This is something I wish to discuss. I wish to discuss something. The goal of a researcher, the goal of a historian should not be to either confirm or deny something. when we do research, when we examine these sources, our objective is not to affirm a narrative that we like, nor is it to reject a narrative that we dislike. What we are looking for is we are looking for the truth. We are looking for the haqq. And may Allah guide us all to the haqq. So we don't accept or reject certain sources simply because we don't like what is being said. This is something that our opponents do. For example, when they see that something is written about the Sahaba that they don't like, say, "Oh, it's weak. We don't accept that." Even when it's Sahih, as some of you have seen, "Oh, it's Sahih, but it's Shad." We pick and choose when we accept reports that meet the standard. When some people I've noticed in recent times, they're obsessed with the red pill. We would say they are obsessed with trying to red pill people. They're obsessed with trying to challenge the status quo. It is okay to question. It is okay to read. Because sometimes when you question, you think critically, you reaffirm your beliefs. You prove once and for all that something is true. You get rid of shubhas. But the objective should not be, oh, I want to shock people. I want to surprise people. I want to ruin people's perception of a certain event. So that's why we need to be careful when it comes to challenging the common narrative. Just because something is commonly narrated on the manabir does not necessarily mean that it's false, but likewise it does not necessarily mean that it is true. We, alhamdulillah, in the madhab of the Ahlul Bayt, we follow, the evidence. What does the evidence point to? Regarding al-Khutbah al-Fadakiyyah, there is a claim, an argument for its fabrication, similar to the one of Ali ibn al-Athir that we presented earlier. So the view is that Abi Ayna and his friend al-JAHIZ. al-JAHIZ is a very famous figure from this time period. He lived from the time of al-Muminoon to al-Mutawakkil. And, he's a very interesting figure. I wish I could go into more depth about him because, if you take classes on the Islamic Golden Age, you're going to learn about al-JAHIZ. He's huge. So JAHIZ was a Mu'tazili. He was really logic-based. But there's something very unusual about al-JAHIZ. In that al-JAHIZ loved to play devil's advocate. Al-JAHIZ would argue for certain things that people would look at him and say, we can't tell if he's being serious or he's just debating for the sake of being argumentative. And you've all met people like this. Sometimes you're in a class and the professor, the teacher is trying to make a point. You have that one student who's just throwing the question out there for the sake of asking the question. It's not benefiting anyone. It's just for the sake of arguing. He wants to argue. He wants to be troublesome. This is what al-JAHIZ was famous for. And al-JAHIZ used to have this ugly habit of, fabricating reports in favor of a certain sect, a certain madhab, like the Khawarij or, these other sects that existed back in the time. So he would fabricate hadith to support their argument, and then he would go out of his way to refute them. And he believed that this is the way you become a great debater, you become a great polemicist, is by getting into your opponent's head. So, in Arabic we say, hada khubth. This is very khabith of him. But, he wrote various different books, which is why certain scholars are like, we can't tell if Abu Uthman, which is al-JAHIZ's kunya, we can't tell if he was being serious or not. So, for example, he wrote a book called Kitab al-Uthmaniyah, where he tries to downplay all of the fada'il of Imam Ali to the best of his ability in order to confirm that Uthman and his predecessors are greater than Imam Ali. So this book is considered like Nasibism 101. It's some of the most ancient and most infamous arguments ever put forward by the Nawasib. But then, subhanAllah, he has another book, Kitab al-Tahkim, or Kitab al-Hakamain, where he defends Imam Ali with everything he's got against the Khawarij. He puts out every single argument he can to prove that Ali salamullah alayh is a great man, he's a great imam, in order to refute the various Khariji sects. And so modern scholars are sitting here and we can't quite figure out what he was trying to do, what side he was really on. When it comes to the issue with al-Khutbah al-Fadakiyyah, there are some sources that say that al-JAHIZ and Abi al-Ayna fabricated the sermon of Fadak. They fabricated the sermon of Fadak. There's some of these sources, we'll show them to you. One of them is Kitab al-Mawdu'at by Ibn al-Jawzi, which is his famous compilation of fabricated hadiths. So he says in Kitab al-Mawdu'at, in volume 1, page 50, he narrates with his chain of transmission, he says, I heard Abi al-Ayna say, me, and it says al-Hafiz, and this is a typo, it's a JAHIZ, وَضَعْنَا hadith Fadak, وَدَخَلْنَاهُ عَلَى شِيُوخ بِبَغْدَادِ. So he says, me and JAHIZ, just for fun, we made up the hadith of Fadak, then we went to some sheikhs in Baghdad, and we started narrating it to them, and they were like, "Oh yeah, wow, this is a good khutbah. Yeah, this is authentic." Just for fun. We don't know what they were doing, why they were doing this. Like, were they just trolling? Did they think this is funny? And this, by the way, is something very, very dangerous. This is something that Ibn Jawzi goes over in al-Mawdu'at. He says, he narrates that once there was a man near the Kaaba, and he was crying, and he was like, Ya Allah, please forgive my sin, and I know you won't forgive my sin, because my sin is too great. So someone came up to him, he's like, Ya akhi, you can't say that. Do not believe that your sin is greater than that Allah will forgive it. So he said, "Oh, you think so? You know what I did? I fabricated a hadith on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I narrated it to so many people, and now that hadith is spreading, and I can't stop it." Hadith fabrication is a very, very serious issue. It is not something to be taken lightly, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in the famous hadith, "Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa maq'adahu min an-nar." Whoever lies on me intentionally or attributes falsehood to me intentionally, let him prepare to take his seat in hellfire. So the next source that we have that confirms this, that Abil Aynat says, me and Jah have fabricated a hadith of Fadak. In Kitab Tarikh Madinat Dimashq, in Tarikh Dimashq, page 45, or volume 45 to page 441. So he narrates that the same thing. That Jahal and Abu al-Ayna said, we went to Baghdad and we fabricated this report. The last report that I will show you is from al-Mas'udi, rahmatullahi alayhi, who's one of the great medieval Arab historians, one of the great medieval historians. So in his fantastic history book, in Muruj al-Dhahab, he says something interesting. He seems to provide a motive. When he's discussing the issue between Abu Bakr and Fatimah, he mentions that al-Jahil wrote a book. He wrote a book regarding Fadak. He wrote this book seemingly because he wanted to use it to help him debate a now dead sect. It's called the Rawandiyah. So the Rawandiyah believed that al-Abbas and his descendants were imams. This sect is obviously dead because the Abbasids came to power. So Jahil, seemingly, according to al-Mas'udi rahmatullahi alayhi, says he made up this report because he was trying to argue something in favor of the Rawandiyah and then refute it. These sources, as well as many others, there's another one I don't have on hand. I believe in Lisan al-Mizan, Ibn Hajar transmits something very important. He says, we don't know what is meant by hadith Fadak here. So he's not saying like this is the famous Khutbah Fadakiyyah. We don't know what exactly he's referring to or what hadith this is. So we argue, now we say after looking at this evidence, we say the following. We say, while it may be true that al-Jahil and his friend Abil Aynat fabricated something related to Fadak, it cannot be the Khutbah Fadakiyyah. And this is for the simple reason that it was recorded. We have records of it long before him or Abu al-Aynat were even born. So as we showed you that it's referenced in certain books, like the Maqatil al-Talibiyin, it's referenced in certain books, like even Abu Mikhnaf had a book on it. So there's no way that the khutbah itself is fake. Was there perhaps a version of it? Maybe. And again, that is a huge maybe, because we don't know what hadith Fadak is that is being referred to in these sources. We don't know if it is in fact that same khutbah. Sayyid Sharif al-Radhi, Alam al-Huda, rahmatullahi alayh, he solves this in a very beautiful way. As though he knew this was a problem, and he refutes it in a very beautiful way. In Al-Shafif al-Imamah, page 76 to 77, he says the following. He says that it was narrated to me by Abu Abdullah al-Marzubani, who narrates, he says that Ali ibn Harun narrated to me, saying that Abdullah ibn Ahmad ibn Abi Tahir narrated to me from his father. And again, this is probably Ibn Abi Tayfur, I believe. And so Ibn Abi Tayfur, we saw in his Balaghat al-Nisa that the chain of transmission is missing. But as Sayyid Sharif al-Murtadha, Alam al-Huda, rahmatullahi alayh, here he is confirming what the chain was. He says, I mentioned to Abu al-Husayn, Zayd ibn Ali ibn al-Husayn, ibn Zayd ibn Ali ibn al-Husayn, ibn Zayd ibn Ali al-Shahid. So this person is a descendant of Zayd al-Shahid. Remember the first time I read this, I was confused. I'm like, oh, that's what he meant by Zayd ibn Ali. He means it's a Zayd ibn Ali, but not the Zayd ibn Ali. This Zayd ibn Ali, according to the Muhaqqiq, is Zayd al-Asghar, one of the companions of Imam Ali al-Hadi. He asked him about the Khutbah Fadakiyyah. Says, I asked him about the Khutbah Fadakiyyah. When Abu Bakr prevented Fatimah from taking her share of Fadak, he says, I said to the Sayyid, Abu al-Husayn Zayd ibn Ali, Zayd al-Asghar, I said to him, these people claim that it is fabricated, and it is a narration from Abu al-Ayna because of its eloquent language. It's too eloquent, it's too powerful. So the way this Sayyid responds is very interesting. It sort of kills the Shubha where it stands. He says, I have seen the elders of the family of Ali salamullah alayhi, the Alawiyin, narrate it from their forefathers, and their children also know it. It's like, my family, the Sada, the Alawiyin, we grew up learning this khutbah. It's been passed down to us from our ancestors, from the Imams. As we saw that Sayyidah Zainab and Zayd ibn Ali and Imam al-Bakr, they all narrated it. My father narrated it to me from my grandfather, who heard it from Fatimah. And he's, of course, referring to his ancestors. He also says this story has also been transmitted by the Shia scholars, and they discussed it among themselves before the birth of the grandfather of Abu al-Ayna, who was al-JAHIZ's friend. So this hadith has been narrated long before he was even born. So Al-Husayn ibn Alwan narrated from Atiyah al-Awfi that he heard Abdullah ibn al-Hasan mention this from his father. And again, we already mentioned that Abdullah ibn al-Hasan has a version of this khutbah. Then Abu al-Husayn said, how can they deny this narration from Fatimah alayhi salam while they accept narrations from Aisha at the time of her father's death, which are more astonishing than the narration of Fatimah? They do this only due to their enmity towards us, the Ahlul Bayt. So the Sayyid says that, subhanAllah, they are rejecting the khutbah of our grandmother Fatimah al-Zahra. It's too eloquent. It must have been made up. It's too eloquent. It's too good. It's too good to be true. But for example, Aisha's khutbah about the death of her father, where she praises her father after his death, this long, eloquent khutbah, that for some reason is accepted. That for some reason is brought up, and it's used as an example of her eloquence and her knowledge. But when it comes to Fatima, it is unacceptable. The Sayyid Sharif al-Radi Alim al-Huda, as we said, he kills the Shubha where it stands. He proves with his own chain of transmission that this khutbah existed long before al-Jahiz and Abu al-Ayna. So to reiterate, the point that, al-Jahiz made up something regarding Fadak, like, first of all, we don't know that that's the Khutbah Fadakiyyah. Second of all, we know that it cannot be the Khutbah Fadakiyyah because we have sources confirming that specifically that it existed long before him and his friend were alive. And Allah knows best. So now, let us go over a shubha that sometimes comes up. There is a version of the khutbah which is reported in al-Ihtijaj, where in the khutbah, Sayyidah al-Zahra salamullah alayha says certain words to Imam Ali salamullah alayhi. No, she says, I don't remember exactly what it is, like, oh, son of Abu Talib, you are sitting there like a fetus or something like that. And so this is commonly brought up as a shubha. They're like, look how in your book, Sayyidah al-Zahra salamullah alayha insults or mocks Imam Ali. So first of all, we say, number one, any hadith which contradicts the Quran, we do not accept it. This hadith contradicts Isma. We believe that both Sayyidah al-Zahra salamullah alayha and her husband Amir al-Muminoon are ma'soom. So the idea of one ma'soom insulting another ma'soom is something that we find very reprehensible. That's point number one. Point number two, the Mukhalifeen are the ones who believe in this aqidah. This matches their aqidah. Mukhalifeen have a hadith, very famous hadith, I think it's in Bukhari or Muslim, where Nabi Musa alayhi salam punches Azra'il, salamullah alayhi, Malakul Maut. As in, we have one ma'soom punching another ma'soom. Correct. Musa alayhi salam, according to them, was unwilling to accept the will of Allah. That Allah willed for him to die at a certain point, so he punches Malakul Maut. He's like, no, I refuse to die now. I want to live longer. As though the Anbiya alayhim salam are not the most zahid of all of Allah's creations. Correct? The most God-wary and the least worldly, the least dunyawi attached people, we would say. So this idea of a ma'soom insulting another ma'soom is not something that we believe in. And there are many such reports that the Mukhalifeen transmit, and there are even transmitted in our books, such as Bihar al-Anwar, quoting the books of the Mukhalifeen, which say that, Sayyidah Zahra and Amir al-Mu'mineen had a disagreement. We say, could they have a disagreement? Sure. There's nothing really wrong with that. There's nothing reprehensible about that per se. But would we see Sayyidah Zahra insulting Imam Ali or disobeying Imam Ali? We say no, absolutely not. While she was, salamullah alayha, his wife, she was his partner. She was the mother of the Imams alayhim salam. She was one of the Ahlul Kisa. She is tahira mutahhara. At the end of the day, she too, she was not an imam. She too was one of the Shia of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Salamullah alayhi. So this report, the other issue with this report is very interesting. It is reported in al-Ihtijaj by Tabrasi, which has no chain of transmission. He simply says it's been narrated on the authority of Abdullah ibn al-Hasan. Now, as we've said, Abdullah ibn al-Hasan al-Muthanna is one of the narrators, but as we said, he is not someone that we consider trustworthy. And then on top of that, in all of the primary sources, all the musnad sources that we've presented to you regarding the khutbah, we cannot find this line. I cannot find this phrase in any of those sources. So this leads me to believe that the version that is being quoted in al-Ihtijaj is shadh. It has that line that cannot be corroborated by the earlier sources that we've presented to you, such as Man la yahdharuhu al-Faqih, Kitab al-Jawhari, as being quoted in Sharh Nahj al-Balagha, al-Shafi fil Imama. These sources that we say carry more i'tibar, they carry more weight because they have a chain of transmission. Al-Allama al-Majlisi, rahmatullahi alayhi, he tries to ta'weel it and he gives an argument that is still very famous. But I see no need, we would disagree with him, we see no need to ta'weel a hadith that has no chain of transmission when we have other versions of it that have the chain of transmission, that are corroborated, and that are, free from that particular phrase. And Allah knows best. Allah is the sustainer. Correct? Now, let us go over, inshallah, we're not running too short on time. Let's go over briefly a summary of the Khutbah Fadakiyyah. So having been denied her right, Syeda al-Zahra salamullahi alayha chose to speak out against the injustice that she and her family had faced. She donned a long veil to preserve her modesty, and speaking behind a screen in the Prophet's mosque, the Syeda al-Zahra made a strong argument, supported by Islamic evidences, asserting that she had been denied her rightful inheritance. She quoted verses from the Quran and reminded the people of the sacrifices of her father, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She expressed her disappointment that some companions, specifically Abu Bakr, seemed to have forgotten the Prophet's teachings. She passionately questioned the hypocrisy and the lack of support from those present. She emphasized her right as a Muslim woman according to the Quran, i.e. the right of inheritance. She challenged the notion that there was no kinship between her and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, pointing at the inconsistency in their claims. Abu Bakr then responded, attempting to justify his actions, but Fatimah remained composed and dignified in her replies. She insisted that the Holy Quran should be the judge in their dispute and warned the audience not to believe falsehoods about her and about her father and to follow the commands of the Quran. She then stressed that obeying the Quran was crucial to avoid losing on the Day of Judgment. Sayyidah Zainab salamullahi alayha narrates the following. And this is something that we will go over again, inshallah, in the martyrdom of Sayyidah Zahra salamullahi alayha. She says, when the opinion of Abu Bakr and his supporters became unanimous about depriving Fatimah alayhi salam from Fadak, and she lost all hope about his reconsideration, she came to her father's grave, threw herself upon it, and grievously complained about the way the people had treated her. And she wept, till the earth on the grave became wet with her tears, and she said in her elegy, there have been after you news and incidents, were you to witness them, you would have disapproved them. We have missed you, the way a parched land misses the rainfall. Your people are in total disarray, see how they have reneged. Jibreel alayhi salam used to endear us with the verses of the Quran, but after you have hid from us, after you passed away, all good is also concealed. You were the moon from whose light people benefited, and upon you was revealed the books from the Lord Almighty. Men have attacked us and humiliated us after you to the Prophet, and all wealth has been usurped. The perpetrator of injustice to us will know his fate on the Day of Judgment, where he will finally land. We have come across things which no one before us, neither from the Arab nor from the Ajam, have suffered. So we shall continue weeping over you as long as we live, and as long as we have eyes which well up with flowing tears. And this was narrated by Shaykhun al-Mufid, rahmatullahi alayh, in his Amali, in chapter 8, hadith number 1. So with that being said, we are going to bring this lecture to an end. And again, this was meant to be purely a historical analysis of the khutbah, to refute any shubhas, to give reassurance regarding its origin, to give reassurance regarding, its corroboration. And, of course, there are scholars who will read the entire khutbah to you. Correct? I neither possess the eloquence, nor do I believe that we have the time to do that. I believe many of you hear it year after year in your own mosques. So we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you who, gathered here and who listened to this lecture, who benefited from us. We ask you to please keep us in your dua. We also ask you to pray for our Muslim brothers and sisters who are suffering throughout the world, wherever they may be. And with that, we will bring this lecture to an end. But first, Surah Al-Fatiha, تسبقها الصلاة على محمد وآل